My name is Jillian Morris. I'm the founder and CEO of Hitlist. If you are not familiar with Hitlist, we make an app, which I hope you all download, that alerts you when there are cheap flights to places you want to go. So it's not your standard flight search engine. It's not, I need to go to New York tomorrow. It's, I need to go to New York for 3 to 5 days before the end of this quarter, or I need to book tickets home for Thanksgiving, or I want to go to the Caribbean for a long weekend this winter. We go through about 50 million fares worth of data a day, and we alert you when flight prices drop so you can travel more for less money. We're very popular with millennials, and we have about 1.3 million users. So that's some background on me. I've worked with a number of big companies. In the process of building Hitlist, I feel like I've talked to every major company in the industry and have had some great successes and a lot of wasted hours. So I want to talk to you all about what it's like as a startup to work with big established companies and the good, bad, and ugly things that can happen along the way. So why would you even work with startups in the first place? There are obviously a lot of risks. The startup might go out of business. They might not deliver on the technology that they promise. I've always thought that this illustration sums it up well. If you can't read the caption at the bottom, it says T-Rex trying to model exponential growth, and it can't because it has tiny, tiny hands. And so an example of this, I remember Steve Kaufer from TripAdvisor told a story to a bunch of Harvard Business School students. I was crashing the class because I found it's much cheaper to not go to business school, but just to go to classes with your friends who do. And what can I say? Startup hustle. So Steve Kaufer told this story where I've Been was a startup that emerged right at the beginning of the Facebook platform, so around 2009 or 10, I believe. And it was the first truly viral Facebook app. They got to over 1 million users within their first 10 days. And it was a very simple thing. You logged in with Facebook, you clicked all the countries that you'd been to, it generated this beautiful graphic that said, oh, you've been to 19% of the world, and you could share it on your Facebook wall. And it was incredibly successful. And someone flagged it to the TripAdvisor team, and Steve said, how long would it take for us to well, I think first he reached out to the Where I've Been team and offered to buy them, but they couldn't come to an agreement between what Where I've Been thought they were worth and what TripAdvisor was willing to pay. So Steve, like any ruthless big company CEO, said, how long would it take for us to build this? And he convened some people from his team, and they said, oh, well, we need to make this committee, we need to do this evaluation of technologies to use, it'll take some time to design it. And the answer that they gave back to him was it would take 3 months and about 30 people to produce this. And Steve said this was produced by 3 guys in a week. So I don't understand why we, with all of the resources that TripAdvisor has at our disposal, can't do the same thing. And he said, what if we just stop everything else everyone in the company is doing, concentrate on this for 3 days, which they did. They released their Where I've Been competitor, totally crushed Where I've Been. It's maybe not the best example of startups and corporates working together, but it is, I think, a very compelling example of how a large corporation can be inspired and driven by a startup to move quickly. And then, taking that one example and extrapolating it more broadly, this was a great point that Bonnie Simi of JetBlue Technology Ventures made. The amount of time that companies are spending on the S&P 500 list has been decreasing rapidly. So in 1965, it was 33 years. In 1990, right, to check my slide, 1990, it was 20 years. It's expected to be 14 by 2026. And in her words, the compelling message is that new technologies enable rapid innovation, and large companies have a lot to learn from nimble startups. So I'm going to talk about 5 main ways that corporates can work with smaller companies. Some of them are pretty obvious, and a lot of them are complementary, but I'm going to run through a few examples, a few case studies, and I think at the end we'll also have a little bit of time for Q&A, and would love to hear what other people are working on and if I'm getting anything wrong. So first of all, hackathons and pitch competitions. I don't think I need to explain pitch competitions. We had one earlier today. Congratulations to Volantio. And I hope you all saw some interesting ideas that you might want to bring back to your companies from that. Hackathons, if you're not familiar with the concept, they're usually a time-limited, usually around a weekend event where teams are encouraged to work on something completely new, and it can be completely different from what they do in their day-to-day job. They can be internal to a company, or they can be external, where a company sponsors it and invites developers to come and play around with their new APIs. It's usually a tremendous learning experience for the company. It's a great way to recruit people. It's a great way to vet ideas quickly. It's a great way to find companies to work with, companies to buy, if you're TripAdvisor, companies to steal ideas from, you know. Sorry, I don't want to give TripAdvisor a bad rap. They've also invested in and bought many wonderful companies as well. You know, they're also a great way to sometimes be surprised by what you don't even realize you have. I love to do hackathons personally. It's how Hitlist got off the ground. I did one hackathon that Amadeus and T-News sponsored, and we created a really simple Chrome app where every time you open a new tab, it would show you a beautiful picture and how much it costs to get there. And we did a little back calculation off your IP address to estimate where your home airport was. So you'd see this gorgeous picture of Bali, and it's only $560 to fly to Bali from San Francisco. And you know, we built this in the weekend and just left it behind. And then a month later, I did another hackathon that Amadeus sponsored. And one of the people said, "Did you realize you hit the rate limit on the Amadeus IPA API that you're Amadeus IPA? I'm certainly ready for happy hour. The Amadeus API that you're using." And I hadn't realized it had gone semi-viral within the Amadeus organization. More than 100 people had installed it. So I took this back to Hitlist. We rebuilt a more robust version over the course of a week, released it. It now gets over 3 million hits a month, and it's one of our primary drivers of user acquisition and brand recognition for Hitlist. So I highly recommend hackathons as a way to discover new ideas. Obviously, you can work with startups through BD deals. I don't think there's much I need to elaborate on that point, though I will talk about some best practices a little later in the presentation. There are also innovation labs. I'll give some examples of those, venture investing, and of course, traditional M&A. So innovation labs, here are some of the more prominent ones that I'm aware of and that I know people who have interacted with. Cockpit is sponsored primarily by El Al out of Israel, and they have run an accelerator. They also have a venture fund. They did an accelerator in partnership with JetBlue Technology Ventures, where a series of startups were selected to spend 3 months in Israel and 1 month in Silicon Valley. They were given, I believe, 100 grand of seed capital, and from that, I think, honestly, as far as I know, not many things came, and I don't believe there has been a second Cockpit. Hangar 51, sponsored by IAG Group, they took, I believe they've had 2 or possibly 3 cohorts now. They bring people in for 10-week sessions, so it's a little bit shorter. Early stage companies, once again, and they are given some investment. Some are given investment at the beginning stages, and they're given the opportunity to pitch for more investment. There are a number of companies that have come out of Hangar 51 which have gone on to raise more money. A lot of these are still relatively nascent programs. Booking.com Booster ran 2 cohorts. They, on their website at least, say that they don't have plans to run another, and that was focused primarily on social enterprises. They did not provide capital up front, but gave companies the opportunity to pitch for capital at the end. Founders Factory is in London. They're partially sponsored by EasyJet and have a focus. Founders Factory was also founded by the founders of lastminute.com. And they run, I think, a traditional accelerator. Again, it's around 3 months. They give some seed funding. and they've incubated a number of interesting companies. Plug and Play Ventures is in Silicon Valley. They have a massive campus and run a number of programs, including one in travel and hospitality that a number of travel companies have invested in, including JetBlue, I believe Lufthansa, Boeing, and a few others. Travelport Labs had their own incubation process, and Qantas had Avro Accelerator. I believe both of those are now defunct. So the lesson is this is a popular thing within the industry, but they don't necessarily tend to last very long. And I would love to hear the perspective of anyone who has been through the process of running one of those accelerators. From the startup's point of view, they're often a really wonderful way to vet and have pilot programs with larger companies, but oftentimes they don't really hit their stride until their second or third cohort because there's just such a large learning curve. So the ones that are relatively new, if they don't last very long, may have limited use. The ones that have been around for a longer time, like Plug and Play and Founders Factory, have had a lot more time to establish value, both for the corporates and the startups involved. One other, Innovation Hub. So Lufthansa's Innovation Hub has been an evolving product. They didn't initially have a physical space, and now they do. It started in 2014, has a staff of 19. I know from the perspective of many startups at the beginning of Lufthansa Innovation Hub starting up, they were very eager to talk with startups, but didn't end up making a lot of investments. That, as far as I've learned, has changed quite dramatically, but we haven't had a lot of announcements yet. I'm very curious to learn more if anyone from Lufthansa would like to share. They are based in Berlin because they recognized that it's important to be in a global startup hub, which Frankfurt is less so. And that's also something that's in common among the various startup accelerators. They tend to be in Silicon Valley, Tel Aviv, London, in these great hubs, and those are the ones that tend to seemingly last and thrive. The next version the next thing I want to talk about is venture capital. Obviously, corporate venture capital is a huge force within the venture capital industry as a whole, and for some reason it's been growing very quickly. Maybe it's because companies got a big tax break recently, maybe it's because people are just, with the economy going the way it is, looking for new and riskier ways to invest their money. But the amount of corporate venture capital that was deployed in 2017 was 66% higher than it was in 2016. And it accounts for around 42% of all venture capital financing actually comes from corporates. I was quite surprised by that. I didn't realize it was that high. But the funny thing is, there's very little of it in the travel space. So a number of travel companies have done some venture capital, but they haven't established large programs. Whereas some of these Google ventures, certainly being one of I guess they're just GV now because they don't want to use the Google name now that they're Alphabet. GV is one of the most prolific, but there have also been ones going back 20, 30 years, and many people would say that the most successful corporate VC in the world is In-Q-Tel. I don't know if you count that as a corporate or not. None of these are in the travel space. So why hasn't travel embraced this, and what is changing now? I think we'll go into a few examples. There's JetBlue Technology Ventures, which was established in 2016, so it's relatively new. Concur established their Perfect Trip Fund, where they committed $150 million to investing in startups. Amadeus Ventures has made a number of large investments over the years. Amex Ventures, if you count that in travel, is certainly one of the most active in terms of the number of investments they've made and the longevity of the fund. Boeing has their Horizon X venture group, which primarily focuses on aerospace, but has also done an interesting quantity of things in sort of moonshotty distribution technology as well. Priceline Ventures used to do a lot more active early stage investments, but has largely focused now on strategic later stage things. To give a little bit more of an in-depth example with JetBlue Technology Ventures, they've made 16 investments so far, and they invest off the balance sheet. So they don't, unlike a traditional venture capital fund, don't have a specific number for the investments that they're making. They're continuously evolving, evaluating what makes sense and what doesn't. One of the things that I think is most interesting about their chosen investment focus is that it's not always directly tied to something that JetBlue is going to work with immediately. So they say they want 50% of their investments to be something that will have a pilot with JetBlue within 18 months. Another 40% might be candidates for a pilot program and integrating directly with JetBlue within 2 to 5 years. But 10% of their investments are focused on things that may never work with JetBlue or may completely displace and disrupt JetBlue. Which is, I think, a very smart investing strategy. According to Christina Heggie, who's one of the venture partners at JetBlue, she pointed out that expecting a company to be able to do a pilot program immediately will make you focus too narrowly. So they want to make sure that they're keeping track of broader trends within the industry and opening themselves up to the returns that can come from focusing on things that might never work with JetBlue at all. So in choosing which startups to work with for a corporate, if you're choosing to, whether it's doing a BD deal or investing or taking them into your incubator, I always think there are a few useful things to remember. And again, this is from the perspective of a startup who has talked to a lot of large companies and realized that a lot of times companies haven't really decided what they want when they start talking to startups, and that can be very damaging and frustrating to the startup. So I always like to say, put your own mask on first before assisting others. So, make sure you actually have buy-in before you try and say you're going to do a fund. I think in the case of many of these short-lived accelerators or short-lived even venture funds, you need to realize that there is the standard timeline for a return on a venture capital fund is 10 years. And it will take a long time to realize benefit from any of these longer-term investments. And if you don't have long-term buy-in from senior members of the company that this is something that you want to focus in, you might end up talking to, I will not name names, but there have been a number of companies that have been very eager to talk to startups, have made large announcements about things that they were going to do, and then not actually ended up funding anything. One example I always come back to, in the very early years of Hitlist, I was talking to a major airline, and they sponsored a pitch competition. I won the pitch competition. We were enthusiastically discussing all the things that we could work on together. From the perspective of a startup, it's always incredibly empowering to be able to talk to senior leaders at a company about creating something new. And we talked for 2 months, invested dozens of hours, if not more, and eventually I said, well, we've been talking about this for quite a long time, and I've been clear on what we need to do for the next steps, so how do we get there? And this executive said, well, actually, we probably won't be able to work on this until we complete this major M&A deal that we have going on. So that'll probably take about 2 years. So why don't we talk in 2016? And I, as the startup, was saying, I just spent 2 months talking to this person. I don't know if I'm going to be around in 2015, much less 2016. It was a complete lack of alignment. So you want to make sure you avoid doing things like this. Another way to evaluate who to work with, this is maybe the ugliest slide I've ever made in my life. I didn't get an art degree. If anyone wants to help me pretty up my slides, please let me know. But I like to think of the travel conversion and distribution channel as a Mobius strip. It never ends. And concentrating on partnering with companies who are either in the stage before you or the stage after you. Because one of the other main things that I see corporates do is you have an individual who gets excited about an idea, but it has nothing to do with the eventual company, with the company's overall mission, and you end up, again, wasting a lot of time on both sides by simply discussing moonshot ideas if there isn't major buy-in. Another way to find startups to work with is look at the ones that are already working with you. So Airbnb famously piggybacked off of Craigslist in its early days to double list homes, and Craigslist, like it does with every startup that tries to work with them, rejected Airbnb's advances. And Craigslist is obviously doing fine, but you do have to wonder what it might have gained from collaborating directly with Airbnb. Eventually, I think what it boils down to is that you need to make sure that there is alignment on speed and understanding of a timeline for how long something will take. And it's not realistic for most big companies to work purely on a startup timeline, but you need to be working with a startup that understands that, and that there is going to be some expectation of this is what we can get done in 3 months, 6 months, a year. Budget, it is very common for corporates to fund the development of new products, and in many cases that's how startups are able to survive. That's how we are able to have products like ITA software, like some of the other smaller companies in the room. And the thing that I think is also often forgotten in the early stages of discussions between startups and corporates is brand. So it is generally going to be very beneficial for a startup to work with a bigger, more established company. But if it's not the right audience and brand alignment, it often can fall flat. You see the companies that the sort of best partnerships between startups and corporates tend to be ones that have a similar drive and a similar brand image. I think it's no coincidence that Airbnb chose to partner with Delta among the large US airlines in terms of the specific demographic and tone of a lot of their advertising and messaging. And it's funny, I was saying backstage, this was either going to take much longer or much shorter. I wasn't sure. So I've already come to an early stop to the presentation, though we also, like I said, will have a Q&A part. So again, why would you want to work with startups? There's a really great article you can all Google, which is 43 dumb things that CEOs of major companies said about startups in their early days. This was one of my favorites. I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers, the president of IBM said in 1943. And not keeping a strong eye on what's coming down the pipeline, what's new in the market. There have been so many classic examples of major companies missing out on trends by not working with startups. And so obviously you're here at this session, this is something you care about, whether you choose to participate in pitch competitions, hackathons, establish longer-term accelerators, incubators, or venture funds. There are resources available, and I hope you take advantage of them, and I hope that this is the beginning of a conversation for many companies who have been looking to evaluate this. And that is it from me. So thank you.